What's going on, guys? Back with the Science of Exercise. I'm joined by Dr. James Reed. He was in our last video about BMI. So for some reason he came back to share some of his knowledge and to join us again. I don't know why he came back. But
No, thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be part of the show.
Absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about body recomposition and all the concepts behind that, which ties into our last video about BMI.
No, I like it. I feel like last time we spoke about BMI and, recognizing risk factors. Now we're talking about how to change that.
Absolutely. Yep.
So body recomposition. Can you explain to me what you would call body recomposition?
Yeah. Body recomp plainly is the decrease in fat mass or adipose tissue that we have and an increase in lean muscle mass or the muscle that we see.
Okay.
Yep.
So basically what everyone wants to do is keep their muscle, gain muscle, lose fat.
Yep. That's pretty much, that's kind of what this whole video's concept's about.
Yeah.
Yep.
For most of it, it sounds good. It's easier said than done. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, there's a lot of little nuances within that, and we got to definitely make sure that we're doing some things properly to have those favorable outcomes. So, yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the advantages.
Yeah. So a lot of the advantages include aesthetics, so how we're looking. If you want to make sure that you're kind of trimming down that physique a little bit, density-wise, you start to become this more dense object, right?
So would you say we're going to more of that ideal figure that people kind of aspire to look
Sure,
like?
absolutely. Kind of that V-taper,
Yeah. For guys, it's going to be more toned arms, more toned chest. For ladies,
Sure.
it's going to be more toned hips. Looking good in bathing suit. What are the other advantages?
Other advantages, you look at just general health markers.
Would you say like improving cardiovascular fitness, decreasing cholesterol, decreasing blood pressure, etc.
Yeah, so all those are associated with preventable diseases in most cases.
Which are so
Correct.
prevalent in today's society.
Yeah, really common, right?
So you're going to look better. We're going to make ourselves healthier, decrease
Sure.
risk of heart attack,
Sure.
decrease risk of stroke.
And then one more is what I would say the psychological aspect is body image. So you're going to start feeling better about how you look in the mirror. Positive body image outlooks is huge on all of those other areas. They all start to become this kind of cyclic approach, right? So these things start to cascade into one another.
Yeah, no, all in all, I can't think of any reason not to do this.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I would say it's pretty ideal. It does take some hard work, though. It does take some. Got to put some time into
When
this.
I first started working with you, I think, working straight for the last year and it's hard to begin
Yeah.
with. It's hard getting
Yeah.
back into an intense workout schedule, but after a month, 2 months, you start feeling the rewards. You start seeing the rewards. It's worth it.
And it's long-term rewards. It's not this. It's not a quick fix. It's this holistic approach that we continue to talk about with the science of exercise. So.
Okay, so we talked about so far what is body recomposition.
Mm-hmm.
We've alluded to what benefits you're going to get from
Sure.
it. Let me back up a second. I think a lot of people make this mistake.
Sure.
You realize you put on 20 pounds, feeling fatigued. Maybe somebody was, played, high school basketball and ready to get back in shape, or they played college baseball, ready to get back in shape.
Yep.
It's, where do you start again? And I think a lot of people,
It's a good question.
I think a lot of people start with weighing themselves on the scale and running every day. Is that a good way to go about body recomposition?
I would say it's a way. It's probably not an optimal way, right?
So what would you say if you want to be as efficient as possible, make your time in the gym, you make your nutrition work for you the best, what aspects would you say are the most important to body recomp?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first and foremost, you need to know where you're currently at, right? If you don't know where you're currently at or what your current energy demands are, then you can go on a diet, you can go train all you want, but at the end of the day, this is the gasoline that's going into the vehicle, right? So if those numbers are off and you're not looking at them properly, you're probably not going to have great outcomes.
So that's an interesting concept. You're going to school, getting a master's.
Sure.
In this, for the rest of us here, how do you calculate where you currently stand?
No, it's really important. So there's a couple different methods. Most are going to be predictive equations that are going to be realistic. More ideal would be what we call a resting metabolic rate. You would see this in more times than not clinical settings. So obviously most people are not going to have the access to this, but it is going to give you a pretty darn accurate measure of what your current energy demands are.
Would you say it's how many calories you're burning throughout the day?
Correct. That's what we consider
with your current activity level, correct?
Yeah, it would be considered more of a resting level. But most people cannot calculate that because they don't have access to that machine or the device that is necessary for that. So we have predictive equations that are pretty good. Hence the word predictive. They're not perfect, but they will kind of give you a pretty good ballpark.
It gets you in the ballpark.
Exactly. And that's why I said find your baseline. And the reason why I said find your baseline is use a predictive equation, which I will put in here for you guys so you guys can calculate that. But the predictive equation is going to give you a ballpark. You use that initially. If you're losing a little weight, then it's probably below your number, right? Your resting level. But if you're gaining a little weight, then it's probably a little high. So you can adjust that number after a week or two to kind of find out what is your baseline. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely.
Cool.
Basically, from what you're saying, you want to know how much energy you're expending without exercise under your current state.
Correct.
To me, another important part of the equation, I think, would be knowing what your current body composition is too, correct?
Yeah, that's actually, you hit the nail on the head. That was going to be the next thing I was going to mention. You need to know what your current weight is. You need to know what your current height is. And you need to kind of know what your body fat levels look like.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's a good way, I mean, tell me some ways to calculate body fat percentage.
Body fat percentage. The most common way, and the way that I would say hopefully most health and fitness professionals know how to do, is what we call a skin fold assessment. I currently use the Jackson Pollock 7-fold or 7 skin fold site. Basically what it is it's kind of a little tool. And what it does is it kind of comes up, it pinches, I take a slight pinch, I promise I won't pinch the hell out of you, but you take a slight pinch, you bring that jaw or that collar right over top, and it measures how many millimeters there are in that subcutaneous skin. So basically you're pulling the skin and the subcutaneous or that upper layer off, and then anything that you're kind of measuring there is going to be considered that fat mass.
So you're measuring the diameter of the subcutaneous fat at
Correct.
different points.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so you take all of those together, and it gives you a pretty good predictive of what your total body fat is, correct?
Yeah, it does a very good job, especially when it's somebody that's been doing it for a while and has done it under proper training. So luckily, I've been able to learn from Dr. Bill Campbell at University of South Florida. He's taken thousands of them. He has been able to coach and teach his students.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So from what I gathered from you so far, you can start out calculating your basal or your resting metabolic
Correct,
rate, your resting metabolic rate, and then your current body fat percentage.
Yeah.
And then your height and your weight.
Yep.
Is there anything else, or is that a pretty good place to start?
I'd say that's a really good place to start. There are some other areas you can look into. I don't think it's necessary for this video.
Okay. So at this point, we've calculated where we are. Maybe set some goals of where we want to be.
Sure.
How do we get there?
Yeah, so now we're going to look into exercise and nutrition interventions. Let's start with nutrition. I think that's probably the first place to start. When we're talking about nutritional recommendations as a whole, you want to keep protein really, really high, as high as possible, I would say, in most cases. And the reason why is it preserves our muscle mass. When we're in a caloric deficit and we're trying to lose a little bit of that fat mass, the tendency, if you do not keep protein high, you will see total body weight loss, which will also be in the form of muscle mass.
Even if you're doing strength training.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
even with strength training, if your protein is below 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, or if you're in the EU, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, you generally see a pretty quick drop off of muscle mass as well.
Okay.
Yeah, in a caloric deficit.
So let's talk about that. Let's get the average American. The average
Yeah.
American.
Yeah.
How close to that magic number of protein are?
Not very close.
No.
You would see most diets would be pretty high in carbohydrates, pretty high in fats, and relatively low in protein in most cases.
Okay.
So
Is it hard to get there?
I don't really think it is. We have a lot of different options. So animal proteins are kind of what we would say the best way to go about trying to get our protein intake. It does have a lot of what we call the essential amino acids, which are not made in the body, and animal proteins are the best way to get that. The other way that I would look into it is there's also a lot of supplements out there. Like we have whey proteins, shakes that you can just toss down real quick, as long as your stomach can handle it, right? And Yeah, so you can get it that way. There is a vegetarian route that you can go. So if you are a vegetarian, you will have to combine a lot of different type of vegetarian protein sources to make it complete or essential, all 8 essential amino acids. So easier if you're eating animal product, a little bit tougher if you're going the vegetarian route, but definitely achievable.
You know, let's talk about the other 2 forms of calories we're consuming, which are
Yeah.
fats and carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, fats I'll definitely talk on. You never really want to drop below 20% of your total caloric intake from fat. You never want to drop below that number. The main reason being you'll start to see performance drop-offs, and you'll start to see potential negative effects with hormone regulation as well. So you want to make sure you're kind of keeping a nice baseline there. Try not to drop down below that. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some cases where you can get away with dropping that number down, but you don't want to do it long term.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a good topic for another discussion. Let's talk
Sure,
about different
yeah.
types of fats. I think we're not going to delve into that at this time.
No, I don't think it's necessary for body recomp exactly.
And then about carbohydrates. Can you
Yeah.
touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, carbohydrates I would say is kind of dependent on how you're training, since mostly what I'm going to be recommending for body recomposition is resistance training. We can keep carbohydrates around 40-50%. You can hit upwards of 60%, that's fine. But remember, we are keeping protein a little bit higher at 0.7 grams per pound. So that's going to be, pushing this, I would say 20 to 30%, probably upper, of that number of total calories. So you're going to need to drop these other numbers a little bit.
So it sounds like from what you're telling me, most Americans can probably get by with what we're already doing by increasing protein and decreasing carbohydrates, and probably the fat, cutting it a little bit. But
yeah, absolutely. That's kind of a real simple way of putting it, like that.
Do you need to keep a log of, roughly how many calories you burn a day versus how many calories you're taking in? Would you recommend taking the food diary? What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, food diary, definitely. A 3-day food diary kind of gets you, again, that baseline that we referred to earlier. So you just kind of see
how
what you're
close to those percentages you're
exactly.
getting. Okay.
I don't necessarily think that you need to log the amount of calories you're burning. I think that would be very dependent on the outcomes of weighing yourself, pretty consistently. I do recommend weighing yourself, daily would be ideal because you can kind of take an average of those numbers. So you can kind of see what's happening. If you're kind of saying, again, with that 0.7 to 1% body weight loss per week, you're gonna be doing good if you're keeping that protein high in resistance training.
And I know this isn't as scientific, but probably just simple as weighing yourself, following the guidelines you're kind of laying out for us, and probably looking in the mirror.
The whole concept behind this. Let's not get too far out of this, because we want people to be able to do it and achieve it. You give these crazy recommendations, people are like, I'm not even gonna try it. I don't even want to do it, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
So we talked about diet, we talked about nutrition, we talked about rest and metabolic rate. I think the next thing is exercise.
Yeah, exercise. So exercise, specifically resistance training for body recomposition, helps maintain or increase muscle mass during a caloric restriction or having decreased calories below what we generally look at, which helps us lose weight, right? So if we're exercising or resistance training, we can increase what we call muscle protein synthesis. And what that means is we're actually going to be increasing what is also known as hypertrophy. So this kind of gets down another track. I don't want to get too far into it, but it's a net positive protein balance when we are resistance training and taking in that protein. That's why.
So we're maintaining or building muscle.
Correct.
Then how do we burn the fat?
How do we burn the fat? That is going to be through that caloric deficit that we're in. So if we're low on calories, we can actually just see it that way because it's going towards energy
So
production.
we don't need to go out and bike 10 miles a day here.
No, you don't have to. I would say that doing some aerobic training can be helpful, no doubt about it. But if you're resistance training 2 to 3 times a week, hitting all major muscle groups, working, I don't say you don't have to go to failure, but close to fatigue, you should be feeling a burn towards the end of those sets. I would say you're going to be putting yourself in a really good position to have these favorable outcomes.
So you're saying, strength training comes before aerobic training.
For body
recomposition.
For body recomposition.
We're not talking about all the health outcomes. We're not talking about all the health outcomes.
No.
We're talking about preserving or gaining muscle.
Correct.
And losing fat.
Correct.
You can do it mostly through strength training and diet.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I would kind of keep it there. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with aerobic training. I would definitely include it in your program. But I would say if you're out there killing it and crushing it on aerobic training, again, the principle of 0.7 to 1% body weight loss per week If it's slow enough, that means that you're going to be able to maintain that muscle mass a lot more effectively. If you're losing weight at 2% per week, 3%, you get these high numbers, you're probably going to be losing a lot more muscle mass.
Okay, no, that's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
And then, just backing up from what I heard from you, 2 to 3 days a week of strength training.
Yeah.
That's not too much to commit to.
No, you really don't. You don't have to be in there every day. Don't get me wrong, the more times you're resistance training a week and stimulating those muscle every 24 to 48 hours, you're going to have more favorable outcomes, but I don't think it's necessary.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of delved into quite a few different aspects of body recomposition.
Yep.
Let's just kind of take a second to review them all.
Sure. So body recomp, what is it? It's the gain of lean muscle mass and the loss of fat mass. What are some of the benefits? Aesthetics, looking better, feeling better. You look in the mirror, you're also feeling better in the head a little bit, so you get these positive psychological outcomes, generally speaking, with it. And you're going to have some positive health outcomes when it comes to decreasing risks associated with preventable diseases. That's generally known when we're decreasing that fat mass, increasing that muscle mass, hopefully decreasing total body weight a little bit, but again, really slowly. The principles involved with that, keeping protein high, again, at 0.7 grams per pound, or 1.6 grams per kilogram if you're in the EU. Resistance training 2 to 3 times a week, and then making sure that we're also trying to reassess often. So you don't want to just go in there and go in blindly with these numbers and just go. You do want to weigh yourself often. I would highly recommend getting a body fat assessment via skin fold calipers, or if you have the ability to use some of these better machines, that's great and dandy. But
or having someone to guide you through this.
Correct. Yeah, or having somebody to guide you through it, definitely, that knows what they're doing. But I would say if you stick to these guidelines and you really put the work in, I think you'll have favorable outcomes and be able to have a good body recomposition.
Oh, excellent. Well,
Yeah.
Thank you for your in-depth knowledge on the subject. I always enjoy hearing
Absolutely.
from you.
Thanks
for having me.
Thanks for interviewing me. We'll flip the tides next time. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and like.